Welcome to the D.A.M Basics. Knife skills are important. Today we're going to talk about knives. We're going to talk about everything having to do with knives, all the different types of knives, how to treat them, cutting boards, and pretty much everything else that has to do with that. So grab a knife and let's get cutting. What is the single most important tool in the kitchen?
A clue!
Almost. Yes, it's your hand. But after your hand, it's a knife. What kind of knife?
Notebook.
No. Chef's knife. If you got a great chef's knife, that's at the absolute basic, all you need. That said, we're going to cover the absolute basic set you should have if you're just starting out, then cover some other knives that are kind of cool to have and you can still use as your basic everyday set. So before we start talking about the knives, let's talk about what the knives normally chop on, because a lot of people spend a lot of money on very fancy knives, and nowadays you can get some very expensive knives, and then they just use like whatever to chop on. You really want to have something that is ideal for your expensive knives. If you don't have expensive knives, then, I don't know, use an iPad or something, I'm not sure. So here we have a chopping board, okay? And if you can see, this is about 1.5 inches thick. When you get a chopping board, you don't want anything that's like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, something like that. It's gotta be at least 1 inch, if not more. And the better ones are 1 inch, 1.5 inches, even more. I mean, you can get like 2.5 inches and whatnot, but you don't need to get those. But you want a thick board because you don't want it to warp. And you definitely don't want to put it, and I know you do, in the washing machine. No, because it'll warp. And all of these strips will start to pull apart, and then you got to go out and buy another one. But this is a chopping board. It's made usually from maple or walnut or something like that. And you want one that's going to be big enough so that whatever you're chopping, you can also push to the side and maybe bring something else onto the board and do what you got to do, instead of using those tiny little itsy bitsy pieces of board that people get at a hardware store. Or you say, do you have something to cut on? Yeah, there's something in the bar over there. I think I use it for lemons. Then you have something about yay big and you're trying to bone a chicken. So it doesn't really work. Unless you're doing a quail, you could do a quail. Never mind. Anyway.
He was our vice president.
Didn't know how to spell tomato. Let's not go there. So this is a chopping board, which is totally different. I know a lot of people get them confused. With a carving board. So hold on. You can tell this is a carving board for roast and chicken and that kind of thing, or whatever, because there's a groove that runs all the way around the edges. And the groove is for catching juice, right? I'll tell you the truth, sometimes these grooves are not very deep and the juice ends up going all over your counter. Anyway, but that's what they are there for. So that is the difference, the main difference between a chopping board and a carving board. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to have two, but you should know the difference. And if you want to use a carving board, because say you already have one, then go ahead and use it as a chopping board. But you can tell it's not as thick. So just be aware of what you're getting. If you want a smaller wooden board, this is probably the smallest I would go. And this is about 1 inch thick, okay? And I don't really use this for serious work. I kind of use this for slicing avocados or slicing tomatoes or something for sandwiches and salads, that type of thing. But if you're really gonna get into it, you know what I mean? You gotta have a really big board. You gotta have a really big board. You gotta have a really big board. So that's wood. Now, when you get wood, you definitely want to take care of it. So I know a lot of you go, oh, I'm gonna take care of it. I'm gonna put all the oil in there, like cream, I gotta rub it, I gotta do all this kind of stuff. But if you do it, it depends on how much you use it, obviously. But if you do it, your board will last years, total years. okay? And wood is still the best material for the kitchen because it's antimicrobial, but you can get like teak, which is really hard, bamboo or something like this made from maple, and you take care of them, they'll last forever. Polyethylene. Can we all say it together? Polyethylene. Plastic of some sort. A lot of people love these. A lot of people really hate these. But I just brought them out just to show you what it looks like. These are also antimicrobial to a point. But if you can look here, you'll see there's all these really deep grooves, right? And what happens after time is bacteria will start to form in there, and you'll start to see this kind of get gray, and then it'll start to get black if it gets really bad. And then it just looks disgusting, and you really don't want to use it before it gets to that point. The trouble with this is that even though it takes a knife blade quite well, it doesn't self-heal. Wood will self-heal. So every time you cut into whatever you're cutting, the knife actually cuts into the wood just a bit, but through usage, it self-heals. It plugs itself up again. Isn't that kind of cool? I mean, it's like, I don't know, Star Trek stuff. So you can use these, just be aware of that. And for cleaning and destaining, just use a watered down bleach, let it sit in the sink for a bit, and you'll just see everything just completely disappear. And the last bit you need to know about cutting boards is towels. Boards typically will slide around, right? So when you're cutting, you don't want your board to be moving at the same time because the odds of you cutting yourself go up and you really don't want that. So I would suggest putting a dampened towel or dampened paper towel on your surface, whatever that surface is, and then putting your board on top. That's pretty much everything we got about boards. Not sure I want to talk about ceramic, glass, because they're absolutely pointless. So at the end of the day, if you see a glass board and you want to use it for a kitchen decoration or ceramic for kitchen decoration, you can do that. But really, for the most part, stick to a really good wood board and take care of it. Okay, now that you've had enough of that, because I know you're like,
Or bored.
Or bored, you're bored. Let's talk about kniffs, knives. So going to buy a knife is almost like going into a wine store, right? You go into a wine store and you're not familiar with wine and you're like, okay. And you're supposed to know what to get, right? You go to a knife store or kitchenware store, right? And nowadays it's the same thing. And then you get somebody come over and says, can I help you? And then they want to say, we have a beautiful $350 knife here. No. Okay. When you start out in the kitchen, and even if you've been cooking for a long time, you really just need 3 basic knives. If you want to invest, which is what you do, in a knife, get something that will last, that's sturdy, and that's made well, and you take care of it. So to that end, the number one workhorse in the kitchen is introducing, ta-da, the 8 to 10 inch chef's knife. That's probably the best known knife in the world, right? Everybody knows that shape. It's got a little curve here and whatnot. And this one will perform the vast majority of everything. So get one of those. This one is actually all the ones I'm gonna show you are forged. They're not stamped. So I'll tell you the difference between that too. You want to get forged if you can. So if you're talking about a forged knife, okay, these are the bits. You have the tip here. You have the spine, right? You have the heel, which is important because that's the part that you're going to grab. You have the tang, which is otherwise known as the handle. And then you have this little bit here, right? This kind of thick bit here, which is the bolster. And that's pretty much the part, as you can see, that then gets tapered and goes completely into the handle. There's 2 rivets on this one. Sometimes you'll have 3, which is fine. Doesn't really matter, 2 or 3. And sometimes the handles are made from wood, from some sort of composite material or resin or what have you. If you're gonna get a really quality knife, it really doesn't really matter what that's made from. It's sort of like a personal preference. Some people like wood more, just doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the most important thing to know is how to handle it. There's a lot of people who end up going to the hospital on Sundays because they end up cutting bagels wrong, and they end up thinking that they feel safer with a dull knife. Because, well, if it's dull, then it won't cut me. Hold that thought. Let me show you something. When you look at the blade and the edge, right? That edge looks like this. It's tapered, right? Nice and sharp, tapered. If your knife becomes dull from usage and you're not taking care of it, this edge looks more like that. It becomes disfigured, rounded, and really these microscopic teeth that are on the edge, right, sort of look like this. The more you use the knife, the more they become out of alignment, which is why you use a steel, right? At some point, you're gonna have to get them professionally sharpened because steel isn't gonna work anymore, and a steel doesn't really sharpen the blade. It just kind of helps bring them back into position, okay? But you tell me if you're gonna cut something like, I don't know, an apple or potato or carrot, doesn't really matter what, tomato, and you put something round on there, what's probably gonna happen? The blade is probably gonna slip this way or slip that way. And then we know what the result is. If it's nice and sharp and you apply pressure, where's the blade probably gonna go? Through the food. Sharp knives are the way to go. The sharper, I know it sounds horrible, the sharper, the better. Next, serrated knife. This is they vary in size, 8 to 9 inches, somewhere in there. A nice serrated knife for cutting through, say, bread or tomatoes, something soft, because the serrated edge helps you with that. And about a 3.5 inch paring knife for small jobs and peeling and doing other stuff that you'll see in another episode. We'll show you how to use this, but you basically end up holding the paring knife the same way. And sometimes you actually even hold it up here. No, I didn't cut myself, but I know it's kind of scary, right? Because I'm holding the blade that way, but we'll come to that, right? Anyway, so paring knife, serrated knife, 8 to 10 inch chef's knife. That's pretty much it. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of other knives that I absolutely adore and you don't need to get, but I'll talk a little bit about them. Okay, I have to say that probably the two knives I go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between are my chef's knife and this cool thing. This is called a santoku. They've become very popular, and you can see that they're shaped a bit differently, right? This one here is curved on the edge, goes up. This one actually doesn't do that and faces down, okay? And this one also has a little fluted or scalloped edge here, which helps with friction. So if you're cutting through something like cheese, like a block of cheese or something, and your knife gets like stuck from the friction that's in there, this here, this fluting, will reduce the friction so that your knife goes right through it. I'm not saying buy a really expensive cheese knife, but I'm just saying you can use this quite a bit. You can use this as a chef's knife. I mean, think of it as like the Japanese chef's knife, if you will, although they're starting to do more of this stuff. I will explain to you later why that's curved. Okay, that's a really good one. Then the second one that I think is gonna be the next big thing, but I could be wrong, who knows, is the nakiri knife, right? And this one either looks like a sperm whale or it looks like somebody lopped off the front of it and there's something wrong with it. Hey, I didn't get my money's worth. No, actually, this is the way it's supposed to be. And the reason for this is that it's made really for cutting through veggies. and because you get a nice clean edge on your veggies, because veggies are a lot of the times round and cylindrical and whatnot. So you can go straight down and you get a cut that goes all the way down, like in an onion, right? If you cut an onion, a lot of the times the bottom part doesn't get cut because if you don't hold this right, this doesn't go all the way down because it's curved, right? If you do this, the part of the onion here is not getting cut. But if you do this, it does get cut. Okay? So that's a cool knife. Don't need it, but it's a cool knife. I think one of the ones that you could probably add, if you have those three and then you want to add one, probably I feel the most important is a boning knife. That will help you bone stuff. That didn't sound right. Fillet of fish, filleting a fish, lamb, whatever. This is a great knife to have because this isn't going to do it. And it's way too wide, way too big. And this is not exactly the same thing either. You need something that's long and slender, tapered, and allows you to cut around bones, that type of thing. I do have another one, which is flexible. See that? This one's flexible. It's stamped and not forged. That's good for doing like fillet of sole. Most people aren't going to be doing that nowadays, but some people prefer a flexible one. This one obviously is not. And then the one thing I want to talk about is sharpening. You get your knives, right, from the store, and you come home and you're like, I gotta cook something, I'm ready to cook something. Because they're like really, really sharp and you want to use them, you want to like show off to yourself and everything. Or at least that's what I want to do. So you get home and they're perfectly sharp, right? They're from the factory. So you go ahead and use them. After a while, they start to get a little dull. That's what this steel is for. Okay? You don't want steels that are like yay big. I've actually seen them. I don't know what they're for. You want something about yay big. I don't know, what is that? 10 inches or so? I think you can get them even longer, but you don't really need them that long. And you basically just run them, right, on the steel lightly, right, at about a 20-degree angle for Western knives, not Japanese knives. And that just aligns those teeth, okay? Doesn't sharpen the knife, but it helps align the teeth so you'll see a difference. At some point, depending on how much you use your knives, you will have to take them in to get sharpened, professionally sharpened, and make sure you take it to somebody who really knows what they're doing. Don't take them anywhere that says, we sharpen knives in 30 minutes or less. No, that's like going to get Lasix in 15 minutes. Don't do that. Okay, those are the knives I usually work with the most. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about before we start slicing and dicing is where are you going to put all those? Do not put them in a drawer. They're going to get all dinged up. And the edge is going to get all dinged up. And you're going to reach into a drawer at some point and you're going to go, ow! So the best thing to do is a knife block. Now this is a really stupid big knife block. I mean, you don't need to get a knife block this big. But I have a lot of knives. I have 3 more blocks. And I got this one because I found it and it actually takes care of pretty much all the knives I normally use in the kitchen. And you place them in the block after you've dried them and everything else and put them in here and keep them nice. You want to make sure that when you wash your knives and everything else, you want to wipe them. You want them to be nice and clean. How do you get your knives so clean? Put some Vindex on it. No, just wipe them clean as soon as you're done and put them back in your block. Don't stick them in a drawer so they mingle all around with everything else. Okay, the last bit I want to go over is holding the knife or your proper grip because it's really important. A lot of the times I'll see a lot of people usually when they're afraid of a knife or they just don't know, which is fine. They'll take a knife, large, small, it doesn't really matter. They'll hold it, I say loosely in their hand, like that. They'll put their finger on the bolster or somewhere around there, right? And then they'll start cutting like this. Or they'll do this kind of thing, or they'll do this kind of thing. But it doesn't really matter what movement they're doing. What matters is that the knife is being held wrong. And why that matters is because the chances of you hurting yourself go up really high because I have no control over the knife. See, I'm applying pressure, but because I'm really not holding that knife, it's going where it wants to go. Remember, you're the master of the knife. The knife is not the master of you. You tell the knife what you want it to do so that you're not at the mercy of the blade. In order to do that, you need to hold it correctly. So here we have the heel, right, near the bolster, and we pinch the heel between our index finger and our thumb. So it looks like this, okay? Oh, can you see that? Okay. Then you allow the handle to lay across your fingers. Okay, I'm still pinching it. And you grip the handle like this. This way, you see that the blade sort of disappears into my hand. And the reason for that is you want the blade to become an extension of your arm. From my elbow all the way to the tip of the knife, it's one straight line. And when you have that, you have total control of the knife. I'm applying pressure, it's not going left or right. It's not going anywhere I don't want it to go, it's going straight down. So if you haven't held a knife this way before, it's gonna feel kind of weird. You're gonna be like, oh, I don't know, I don't like this. I don't know, I mean, how can you do this? I don't even understand how you can do this. But I guarantee, once you start doing this, you will get to the point, and it'll be sooner than later, if you cook a lot, that you won't be able to go back to the way you were doing it. And you'll be like, oh, I don't know how I was doing it that way. I mean, that was just, I don't know. I don't know how, I mean, this just feels really good. And it does. He said, on guard. That is the proper way to hold a knife. Whether it is a paring knife, okay, or a chef's knife. So, remember earlier, I talked about why the bottom is curved, especially here, right? And that's because in Western cuisine, the way we use the knife typically is what you heard of a sawing motion, right? So that's when we place the upper part of the knife on the board and we saw, or some people call it a rocking motion, call it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. And we do this type of thing where you'll see this part of the knife never really leaves the board. And the cutting motion over here, whoop, is what cuts what you're cutting. See that? The tip of the knife is not leaving the board. The other thing that we do, depending on what kind of item we're cutting, is instead of using that rocking motion, we start above the vegetable or whatever it is, and we go down towards the board. But we still saw into it. We don't go straight down. We either saw into it this way or we saw into it this way. But we don't go straight down. Straight down, it just applies pressure, and especially if your knife isn't that sharp, all you're gonna do is squash everything that's below there, because you definitely need that motion of rocking or sawing back and forth. So this, right, is pretty much the same as that, or this. See, in my head, I'm doing it the other way, but it looks the same, right? So, why do I say that? If you are cutting something, hold it, I'll be right back. If you're cutting something that is a lot bigger and wider than, say, a small carrot, right? You doing this, you're working against yourself now, because you're going up way too high, right, to cut this whole thing. So in that case, instead of doing this type of thing, right, instead of doing this type of thing, because it's just too high. Like for an onion, say for an onion, you would start up here and saw down. Or if you want, you can saw this way. Typically, you saw away from yourself, okay? Or slice away from yourself. Saw. Hey, Jason, want to come over and saw some zucchini? So that's when you would, I'm still holding the knife the same way, but that would be the next way of doing it, okay? After you know how to hold your knife properly, right? It's your other hand, and in my case, it's the left hand. It's your other hand that is the smart hand. This hand does what this hand tells it to do. What do I mean by that? I mean, your knuckle, it could be this one or it can be that one, okay? But it's your knuckle that's the guide and tells this knife how big, how thin, whatever you want it to do, what to do. Reason being, you use your left hand or your right hand as a claw, right? And I like to use my index finger. Some people use their middle finger. I like my index finger. But you tuck your finger back so that your first knuckle here is the furthest forward. Reason being, you want space in here, this little triangle of space, and that's your protection zone. What do I mean by that? If I place the knife blade up against my knuckle, it's not going to cut anything. It's not going to cut me. It's going to cut what I'm cutting, but it's not going to cut my finger, right? Because I'm telling the knife where to cut. So if I go fast, it's really just my finger telling the knife where to cut. All the knife is doing is this, nothing else. It's this hand that's controlling everything. The last thing I want to say about that is when you do use the claw, make sure that your thumb and your middle finger, okay, are not out here. That's not a claw, because now I've got my tip of my thumb further out than the knuckle of my index finger. And when I do that, I'm not going to cut my index finger, but I'm going to take the top of my thumb off with me, and that's not good. So as long as everything is behind that knuckle, you're good to go. And forget about trying to go fast. That'll come later, the more you do it. Just try to go for the precision, not military style, but get it down first and just forget about the speed. That'll come, if you even care. If you don't care, that's fine too. Just enjoy. Hey there, thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun viewing this video as I had making it. If so, click the little like button, subscribe, and ring that bell. You can also send me your comments, questions, or requests. I'd love hearing from you. And don't forget to come back next Wednesday for an all-new episode. In the meantime, keep cooking and baking memories.